This morning a folio for the park to be kept by the board of directors for scrutiny by any member of the cooperative, our package of closing documents. I'm happy to report that the deed was indeed recorded in the Charlotte County records first thing Monday morning, the 25th. And I'd just like to recite for you the recording information. The warranty deed dated November 22nd, 1991 was recorded in Official Records Book 1187 at pages 1315 and onward in the public records of Charlotte County, Florida. And this is our official notification in the records of the purchase of the park. Of course, it's followed by a sizable mortgage, but the deed is indeed in the name of the association. That was only one step in the process, however. And I'd like to turn these over to Allison on behalf of the board for your consideration. I have also proceeded now with the creation of the cooperative filing. And today I'm going to work with the board of directors, and if you'll have patience for us, I'd like to discuss some of the details of the documents with you and some of the issues with the board. A draft of the prospectus had been made available to the board early on so that a committee could study the documents and make suggestions for revisions. There have been some changes to the cooperative law since that draft of the prospectus was made, so I've had to incorporate those changes by law into our new text. And we've also asked for the assistance of Etta Crosby and the Rules Committee to prepare a new set of rules and regulations for the community, which will be submitted with the prospectus too. We have also prepared a document called a description of the facilities and services in the community, and that will be made a part of the prospectus filing too. Now, we will be hopeful of filing this material tomorrow in Tallahassee. Upon the signing of the documents today by Allison as president on behalf of the board, we will submit this by Federal Express to Tallahassee, and this is to be reviewed at the Bureau of Condominiums. They review all of the condominium and cooperative filings in the state. And fortunately, I know personally the bureau chief up there, and I will impose upon her to oversee in an expedited way the processing of this prospectus, because it's important that we seek the approval, obtain the approval of the prospectus before the end of the year, so that we can meet again and sign the proprietary leases and have those recorded in the Charlotte County records by year's end. I'd also like to share with you that I have spoken with a member in the property appraiser's office, and I'd like to share his name with you because he was most helpful. Joe Waltner. Joe Waltner, his phone is 743-1481. He's with the Charlotte County Property Appraiser's Office, and I've asked him to impose upon his staff to arrange a meeting here at the park in January so that those of you who are eligible for the homestead exemption can apply for it, and also to purchase the RP decals, or at least to get the designation forms and have those signed. And I've also asked him to have the tax collector's office be a part of that meeting, because it's actually the tax collector who receives the payment for the decals. And if you recall, they're $4.60 a piece for a single wide, or $9.20 for a double wide home. And those are permanent stickers that will stay with the home forever, even on the resale of the home. But it's important to have those decals in place before the end of January so that you will not have to purchase next year's decals. The 92 decals that are on your window now expire at the end of January of 92, and you'll receive notification in the mail for the next payment for the annual registration. But you should disregard that payment, those of you who are members of the cooperative. I suspect all of you present this morning are now members of the cooperative. It will not be necessary for you to renew those decals. In fact, I would suggest you not renew them because it's most difficult to seek a refund of any overpayment. And if you pay in advance, you'll have a hard time getting that money back. So I'd ask that you wait, indulge us to arrange the meeting here at the park, and we'll do our best to have all that accomplished with adequate notice for you all so that you'll be able to participate. Those of you who will not be able to attend the meeting in the park on the date that it's scheduled may visit the property appraiser's office directly. Once your lease has been executed, we will handle the recording of it, but the tax authorities have access to the public records and they'll be able to hunt down your recorded document. And with that recorded document, you're eligible for the RP designation, and those of you who will be Florida residents will be eligible for the homestead exemption on next year's tax roll as well. The RP designation, as I said, should be obtained before the end of January. The homestead exemption, for those of you who will not be able to sign up at the meeting, may apply until March 1st of next year. You have 2 months at the beginning of the year to apply for the homestead exemption. So we should have adequate time to take care of all of that essential business for you on a personal basis. As I said, I brought with me this morning the cooperative materials, and I brought an extra copy along too, so that the board will be able to keep access to this even after we've signed together today. Allison, let me turn over a copy of that material to you. And what I'm going to do is just walk you through it document by document. The first document is a filing statement. It's merely a cover material that indicates some of the details of the property, the name of the owner, the name of the property. By the way, we have reserved the name Gulf to Bay Cooperative, Inc. as the new name of the association. It's a little bit shorter, it'll be easier to work with, and it's really more to the point about the nature of the association's business. So the Gulf to Bay Mobile Homeowners Association Incorporated's name shall be changed shortly to Gulf to Bay Cooperative, Inc. Also, the property itself will be known as Gulf to Bay Cooperative. And we are going to be filing a fictitious name in that name so that the corporation can do business either way, in the corporate name or as Gulf to Bay Cooperative. And so that type of material is set forth in this cover sheet. There is also a filing fee requirement, which I need to inform the board of today, because hopefully I can leave today with a check from the association for $1,695. It's a filing fee of $15 for each unit, 113 units to be created in the cooperative, and that's the fee to the state for the processing of the cooperative. Now, there is an annual fee that we won't have to pay in this first year of $1 per unit. So there'll be a $113 annual recurring fee. I'll share with you, though, that's less than the trailer park has paid in the past as a rental park. As a rental park, under Chapter 723, the park owner pays $3 per unit per year. In this coming year, the park will still be obligated to make that payment one more time. But then in future years, the park will pay merely $3 for each of the unsold lots from the cooperative, just those lots that are still being used as rental spaces. So that fee will start to diminish quickly. Now, the text of the prospectus itself begins with a cover sheet, and basically the cover sheet explains to purchasers that you should read the prospectus carefully, because verbal representations can't be relied on. You must look to the written text for the detail. And then there are some disclosures which explain some of the outline of the property. It states, first of all, that the property will have 113 units, that it's fully built already, that the members will receive a membership certificate in Gulf to Bay Cooperative Incorporated, that the master form proprietary lease is a part of this prospective filing, that the units themselves, this is the age restriction, that permanent occupancy of the unit is restricted to retired adults, one of whom must be 55 years of age or older, and all of whom must be 50 years of age or older. And the age restrictions are intended to maintain compliance with the Federal Fair Housing Act. Now, I should share with you, though, that there is an exemption for those who are already in possession of a home in the community. So this will apply to future occupants of homes in the community. So the age restriction will remain intact. Also, pets are not permitted in the community. I know that's been a rule in the past, but that's also set out here. And then there are some restrictions regarding the use of the property that I thought it prudent to express directly in the prospectus. For instance, the issue of the coastal construction control line on the Gulf side of the property. There's an acknowledgement here that the homes that are seaward of that line will face stricter permitting requirements before being able to add on to those homes or to replace those homes. And so we've indicated that that will apply. And we do have the location of the line indicated on the survey, and the survey itself is going to be an exhibit to this prospective material, so you'll have a copy of that too. The second issue was that the property is zoned in the commercial tourist zoning district in Charlotte County under the current ordinance, and that this is a legally non-conforming use as a trailer park for the current use of the property. This use may not be intensified or expanded beyond its current level of activity, and if the use ceases for a period of more than 1 year, then that non-conforming status is lost, and the property would have to be used for a proper zoning purpose. And the third item was that structures lawfully in existence on the date of the ordinance may be non-conforming today, and those non-conforming structures may not be enlarged or moved unless the change conforms with the current zoning regulations. Only ordinary repairs and maintenance of the non-conforming structures is permitted under the current zoning ordinance. And if any structure is destroyed to an extent of more than 50% of its replacement cost, then the reconstruction can't be allowed without the further permission of the county. Oh, I'm sorry. The age restriction, second person should be 45, not 55. Okay, there's been a change. This is why it's very helpful to be a part of this process. Bear with me one moment. I'm just going to make the change in a few spots.
Pardon?
I think this thing needs up a little bit. She said you could raise it up. Oh, that's how you do it.
How high do you want it?
Wait, let me see. Okay, that's better. Now, how do I tilt the camera?
So, to tilt the camera, hold this and loosen it up here, and then you can move it any way you want, as long as, and you can just turn it and lock it. And if you want to use it, you can turn this off, take the camera right off of it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But you see now, that is locked here. Okay, so all you have to do now is to fit those where you want it.
Oh, okay.
But
Right.
this will take care if you want to go up or down.
Oh, okay. Thank you. It's better.
With regard to the age restriction, the age restriction will now read that one person must be 55 and all persons must be 45 or older in the home for new occupants in the future. Also struck the word retired, so that we're dealing merely with adult persons without further characterizing the adult. Okay. The next document in the material is called a description of the cooperative. And again, it shows the maximum number of units will be 113. It shows that the property provides for the central utilities of water, electric, and telephone, that the plot plan of the community, which is very similar to the diagram that you've used in the past, in the community that was a part of the rental prospectus. It's been somewhat revised to be a bit more accurate, but it's still merely an approximation of where the homes are located in the community. In the cooperative, it isn't necessary for us to provide any greater detail for the location of the units, but that map will also be a part of the prospectus materials, and it's described here. Okay, that's really about all there is in that item. A lot of it is just language that's required by statute. We've also prepared an amended and restated set of the Articles of Incorporation for the Cooperative Association. First of all, we've changed the name of the association, so that appears in the amended version. And we also have changed the nature of membership in the corporation. That membership is now going to be limited to those who have purchased the membership certificates in the cooperative association. We've also listed the current board of directors in the community, and we've reestablished the registered agent for the corporation as being myself at our law office. We now show that the community is a cooperative association and that the association itself will have all of the powers authorized by Florida law regarding the operation of a cooperative. We also provide that the bylaws, once approved by the board of directors, hopefully today, that future amendments to the bylaws will require a 2/3 vote of all of the unit owners in the community. So it's no longer going to be in the sole domain of the board of directors. All that the board will be able to do is propose amendments, adopt resolutions encouraging the adoption of an amendment, but the amendments themselves will be proposed at an open meeting of the membership and voted on by the membership directly. And then this document requires signature for Allison and for Francis secretary, and then I'll be notarizing for them and signing as registered agent. It's not a difficult one. The next one is the bylaws of the association. Now that the community is a cooperative, it's important that the corporation operate in accordance with the Florida law. So the bylaws are a bit more voluminous than we've had in the past, and they've been substantially rewritten, but in many ways they represent the mode of operation that you have engaged in the past anyway, except that the business of the association will now be limited to the cooperative unit owners. We show the office address as being the corporation's address, and that the corporation has converted Gulf to Bay Trailer Park into a cooperative form of ownership under Chapter 719 of the Florida statutes. The bylaws describe how a unit owner may have purchased a membership certificate subject to the lien for the balance of the payment for those who have not fully paid the unit price. It shows that except where noted in the bylaws, many of the votes that are taken can be handled on a majority vote only. There's no need for a 2/3 requirement unless it's a matter of revising the documents themselves. There is an opportunity to use proxies in many of the elections that take place, except in the election of board members. Board members must be voted on by written ballot, and the ballots must be not signed but executed by the unit owners themselves. The law was changed recently to not allow the use of proxies for the board election. But for other types of votes, issues dealing with the budget or amendments to the bylaws that may occur in the future, those votes may occur with the use of proxies for those of you who will be absent at the time of the election. There's a provision in the documents for appointing a voter, a representative for the unit. Those of you perhaps who own your unit with your children or multiple owners other than a husband and wife, you are supposed to appoint a voting member for that unit so that the corporation doesn't have to pick and choose who is entitled to vote the interest. There's only one vote per home, and so it's important for the owners to indicate to the corporation who that owner will be. Now, when notices are prepared for the March annual meeting, that will be one of the documents included with the materials, so that you don't have to rush into it today, but about 30 days before the meeting, you'll receive notice of the annual meeting, and one of the documents in that will be a certificate of appointment of a voting representative. And if the unit is owned by multiple owners, then the multiple owners should sign that certificate to indicate who the voter member will be. Notices generally for meetings will require at least 14 days notice to the members. The annual meeting actually requires 30 days notice to the members. And so the board will be instructed, and as they review this material, it should be quite clear as to the notice obligations. In many instances, the notices must be mailed or hand-delivered to the unit owners. In some instances, the notice is sufficient if it's posted in a conspicuous place on the grounds here at the park. There's an order of doing business for the association meetings and also for the board of directors meetings. There's provision for the election of the board members, as I spoke of. The election must occur by a written ballot, and so the written ballot will also be a part of the annual notice material so that you'll have it well in advance, and those of you who won't be in attendance will be able to send it back in before the meeting. It is supposed to be a secret ballot, so the process that I would recommend to the board is that there be only 113 ballots arranged, and actually right now there are only 76 units that I'm aware of that are purchased in the cooperative, so there'll really only be this year's 76 or perhaps a few more ballots in time for that meeting. Oops, 77. No, it's not an auction. But the number of units that are in existence 60 days before the election, that will be the number of voters at the meeting. Although there are additional certificates that have not yet been sold, the policy is for the board not to vote those interests at a meeting. The board may use those votes in order to establish a quorum at a meeting, so there's never any problem with the corporation gathering together to do its business. But when it comes to the substantive votes, those votes should be limited to the sold membership certificates. So we'll have approximately 77 votes at the at the annual meeting with regard to the election of directors. The directors are voted by a plurality, so it's the highest number of votes will win those respective elections. All of the members who are going to run for a board position will appear on the same ballot, and everybody will be directed to vote for merely the number of people for which there are board positions open. Now, at all times, the corporation will operate with a board of directors of at least 5 persons, but it will actually range between 5 and 9, depending on the interest in the community to serve on the board of directors. The intention will be for the board to rotate on and off, so that there will be staggered terms for the board members. There will be 3-year terms for the board, and the hope is that every year 3 members will be voted into office. And so there'll be continuity on the board, but there'll also be new leadership over time. There's provision for the creation of a nominating committee by the board of directors to help solicit for candidates for the board. But there's also a process that's new in the law that I've put into your documents for the first time in any of our cooperatives dealing with the election process. Any member in the community, any member of the cooperative has the right to run for a position on the board of directors. And the board is obligated to give notice in writing to all of the homeowners in the cooperative at least 60 days before the election that candidates are being sought for the board. And within 20 days of that time frame, that is at least 40 days before the meeting, any homeowner who's interested in running may indicate in writing the interest to the secretary of the corporation. So it's an open process, all comers. There's no need for a nomination process. There's no need for a second to a nomination. Anybody who's interested has the right to be put on the ballot. The ballot itself will then be created within the next 10 days, because 30 days before the meeting, the ballot must go off to all of the unit owners in the cooperative, and then the unit owners will vote on the written ballot. That process is all set out here, and you should have ample time to study this before the first annual meeting. At the annual meeting, the Board of Directors will also meet. Once the board election has taken place, the board will meet to elect from its group the officers for the coming year, the president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. And the duties of those officers are set out in the bylaws too. Typically, in order to conduct the business of the corporation, it's necessary to have a quorum present, and the quorum is a majority of the voting interests in the community. In the wintertime, that shouldn't be a problem, but it may be a problem in the summertime. And it may even be a problem in the summertime for the board of directors to have a quorum present, which is a majority of the board. And so there's a provision in the documents that the board may elect an executive committee, which is a subcommittee, in a sense, of the board of directors, who may manage the park in the summer months. That committee will be made up of 3 to 5 directors, so that we won't need a quorum of 5 in order to do business in the summertime. We might only need a quorum of 2 or 3 directors in order to do business. But the responsibilities of that executive committee are limited. They're limited to the routine management of the property. They're not allowed to vote for assessments against the units, issues of that sort that would affect the pocketbook. They are merely to oversee the operation. It gives them the ability to sign contracts for the ongoing maintenance of the property in the summer months, but even in the absence of a quorum. This is an optional feature, and each board of directors will make a determination each year whether or not to appoint an executive committee for those summer months. There's provision in the documents about the voting of assessments. I've described this for you before, but there was a lot more on your mind at the time, so let me share it with you again. The board of directors is responsible for the budget for the community, and the accountant, Tom Peacock, has prepared the budget for the coming year, which is going to be a part of the prospectus material, so you'll each have a copy of that too. The assessments in the first year are scheduled at $100 per month per unit. I know that much you're familiar with already. Under the terms of the documents, and in accordance with the Florida law, the board of directors is limited every year to not increase the assessments by more than 15%. Now, it's not likely that the assessments are going to be increased even that much, but I want you to be aware that the board has the discretion to raise the assessment at least that much. If the board raises the assessment by more than 15% in a year, then the homeowners, by gathering 20% of the units on a petition, can call for a special meeting to reconsider the budget and to propose an alternative budget for the operation, and then dictate to the board how the budget should read for the coming year. Now, it's not likely you'll ever invoke that process, because it's not likely the assessments will ever rise that dramatically. But I want you to be aware that that process is here in the documents, so that there is some checks and balances of the budget system. And there's one other feature to the budget I want to share with you, and that is the reserve accounting. There is an obligation under the Florida statutes for the board of directors to work with a table of reserve accounts. The reserve accounts deal with the capital assets, the assets that have value of more than $10,000 and have a life expectancy of more than 1 year, because it's not part of your routine maintenance that these assets will deteriorate and need substantial repair or replacement, but over time these assets will deteriorate, and it's important to budget for them. And so in the budgeting process, the board is required to approve a budget that provides for the extra funding of reserve accounts. Now, in Tom's budget, he indicates that the reserve accounts would run about $20 per month per unit, in addition to the $100 routine maintenance fee. But in the first year, the board has determined not to fund the reserve accounts. And this is, to some degree, based on their advice from me. And that is because we have already begun the operation with a very good-sized bank account for commencing the operation of the cooperative. And although we know that we're going to need to dip into that account to cover the shortfall on the rents for the non-participants in the early years, we also know that we're going to replenish that account over time. And once that account is replenished, there'll be ample money for the handling of reserve account items. And so in the early years of the cooperative, we don't see an important need for the funding of the reserve accounts. But I want you to be aware that after this year, since the budget is prepared unilaterally this year by the board, that in future years, when the budget is considered, and that will probably be at a December meeting so that the budget can take effect for January 1st of each year, that you will vote independently on the funding of reserve accounts. The obligation for the board is to give to you a budget that shows the reserve accounts, and then the unit owners must vote by a majority to not fund the reserves for that coming year. But every year you get notice of what the reserves would cost so that you can make an independent evaluation and in your best business judgment decide whether or not to fund the reserves. A couple other tidbits about reserves. Once the money is paid to the corporation, that money is segregated from all other purposes, and so it must be used for those repairs and replacements of the capital assets. And what we're speaking of here is the clubhouse building and roof, the streets in the community, the shuffleboard courts. These are the larger assets that are controlled by the corporation. Once that money, as I said, is dedicated to the corporation, it must be used for those purposes. It cannot be refunded to a homeowner either. So in the event of a sale of your home to a future buyer, there is no transfer of that reserve money. The money stays with the corporation. The likelihood is that your buyer and you will not prorate it. Your buyers won't know about it, and you really have no claim to that money once you've paid it to the corporation. In all of my years of experience on handling sales of properties, whether in condominiums or cooperative parks, it's never been an issue at a closing table. So I want you to be aware that once that money is dedicated to the corporation, it's gone. I also want you to be aware that just because you fund the reserve accounts doesn't mean that you won't be specially assessed for a major repair or replacement that might come due before adequate funds have been raised through the reserve accounting. So in other words, there's no guarantee just because you're funding reserves that that's going to be the limit of your obligation. What's important to know about reserves is by building up reserves, you are hopefully diminishing the need for a special assessment for those particular items in future years. We'll talk about it some more as the annual meetings transpire, but I think that much information is going to be helpful to you in understanding why the Florida legislature put that language into the statutes. They wanted you to have notice every year of the reserve accounting and its purpose. There's also a limitation against the board of directors. The board may not borrow money in excess of $10,000 at any time for use in the corporation without the consent of the unit owners. So there's a borrowing limitation imposed on the board of directors. The board does have the authority to renegotiate the terms of the mortgage or arrange a substitute mortgage on the property, but only for the mortgage amount. They're not allowed to arrange a new mortgage without further consent of the unit owners. A little note was passed to me regarding the seawalls too. The seawall is also a capital asset of the corporation, and so that would also be appearing on the reserve accounting as a part of that annual budget. There's also a bonding requirement in Florida law, and it's important for you to know that there is insurance coverage on the common area of the community. There's public liability protection in the name of the corporation as well. Jack, since he's holding the mortgage, also appears as a co-insured on the insurance policies. There's insurance coverage for the truck. There's also what we call fidelity bonding for the officers who control the money of the corporation. And that's an obligation under Florida law. It's also good business practice. All of that insurance information is available to you for your review as you like. It's maintained by myself and by the board. There's also an obligation to provide to you an end-of-the-year financial report so that you know how the money has been spent and you will know what the cash balance is at the end of each year. And the accountant is to prepare that material within 60 days of the end of the fiscal year, which is the end of December. So by the end of February, there should be an annual statement available to each of you, and it is to be distributed to each unit owner in the cooperative. So at the beginning of the year, there's a budget, and for the end of the year, there's an end-of-the-year statement. The corporation will also maintain the individual ledger cards for your units. We've talked about this before. Those of you who are paying on the mortgage will be entitled to an accounting of the interest and the principal that you've paid during the course of the year. For those of you particularly who itemize on your tax return, you'll need to know the interest expense that you have paid. We've talked about real estate taxes before. Of course, the real estate tax bills will come to you individually next year. But in any instance where the bill comes to the corporation for some unforeseeable reason, there would be a proper proration of that tax bill between the unit owner and the corporation, or the bill would be fully passed through if the owner was the owner throughout the year. The amendment process is set out in the bylaws, as I said, generally requiring a 2/3 vote of the unit owners. There is a restriction, we've discussed this before, a restriction on your transferring of your membership certificates and the proprietary leases in the cooperative. You must seek the approval of the board of directors or a committee of the board for the turnover of your homes. And that's because we want all buyers, all tenants to know of the rules and regulations, to agree to live by them, to acknowledge there's an assessment responsibility here in the community. When we record documents for individual resales, one of the documents will be an approval of sale that will be signed by typically the president or vice president of the corporation, which will also be recorded in the public records to give to your buyer an assurance that the buyer's been accepted, meets the proper age restrictions, or agrees to live by those age restrictions in the community and all of the others. It's also a way for the board to monitor on the resale that all the assessments are current from the seller, so that the buyer walks in and doesn't have any outstanding obligations to pay up for the seller who was delinquent. So that process is also set out in the bylaws and the proprietary lease. There are also easements provided in the documents dealing with utilities and access, that you'll have free access and use of the utility services in the community that have been provided in the past. There's, of course, walking easements between units and the travel ways on the streets. It also makes mention of the rules and regulations. Now, rules and regulations are proposed by the board of directors. They're voted on by the board, too, and by a majority vote of the board. So rules and regulations are a bit more flexible than the other documents. Now, the rules will require 90 days notice before they go into effect, and meetings at which the rules are reconsidered by the board that affect the use of your property require 14 days notice to the homeowners before the board can consider those changes, so that will also be an open meeting where the unit owners may participate. It's also important to know, although you're indulging me this morning, that every unit owner has the right to speak on every item on the agenda at a board meeting or at an association meeting. Now, that's new under the law. It used to be that the board of directors had a lot of control about the handling of a meeting. But unfortunately, in some respects, the law has now made these meetings, in a sense, a free-for-all, because everybody has an opportunity to speak on every issue. The board does have the right, though, to promote rules to limit the time and manner in which the speeches may be given or presentations given on the agenda items. But there is an unencumbered right to speak on each issue on the agenda. So it's important for the board to prepare a proper agenda and make that a part of the notice of the meeting so that you can prepare statements on any particular topic. And I think it's good that we have this on the record today, because this is a new feature of the Florida law. This was only adopted by the legislature a year ago. So we'll have to see how it works in practice. There's also a provision, though it's not likely, and I don't want to sound that there's anything imminent here, there is a provision for the cooperative association to acquire additional property. For instance, the property next door came available and the price was right, and you felt the timing was right to expand the property, or perhaps to help relocate homes outside the property and expand your boundaries. There's a provision in the documents to allow for purchasing of additional property. It's going to require a vote of the unit owners beforehand. And when that vote takes place, then the board will have further discretion to complete the purchasing of those additional lands. There's a paragraph on that topic here too. Nothing is in the works, not likely. We're very happy to have accomplished what we have, but we want you to be aware that there is some flexibility with the operation of the community and that you may take advantage of business opportunities in the future. There's also a provision about the recreational facilities in the community. There'll be discretion to add to those facilities as space permits and as your budgets permit. There's also provision to reduce those facilities. That's not going to happen without a lot of comment in the community, and it's probably never going to happen, but it's important to know that the transaction that's being arranged here is being arranged by yourselves directly. This is uncommon. Typically, a condominium or cooperative are created by a developer who makes available certain facilities and guarantees those facilities to stay available. Here, the purchase is being made directly by the association, and the conversion is being made by the association, so you know better than any outsider what works best for the community. And so there is some discretion about manipulating those facilities and services in the community to best serve the population. There's also a provision for arbitration of disputes. I've talked about this before in the context of boundary line disputes between neighbors, that the board of directors is authorized to determine boundary lines if neighbors can't agree upon what the custom had been in the community in December of 1991 when the cooperative leases are first executed. But there's also a provision to arbitrate other disputes that may arise in the community. Frankly, in all these years, this has never been an issue in our cooperatives, but Florida law requires that we provide such provision. And then arbitration is to take place in accordance with the rules of the American Arbitration Association. And that, in a nutshell, are the bylaws to be signed by the Secretary of the Corporation. Then I brought with me a copy of the budget that the accountant has prepared for the individual units. The total monthly expense actually is $175.44 per unit, but the corporation is going to realize income from rents and other sources of income in the community of $75.44 per unit per month. And so the net result is a payment by the cooperative members of $100 per month per unit. There's also the language about the statutory reserves, how the board is determined not to fund those reserves in this first year. Also included with the prospectus is a document called a purchase agreement. Now, you have all arranged your purchases on the subscription agreement because you are already members here in the community for the purchase of the property. But in the future, for the first time purchase of a unit, that is a rental lot or a vacant lot in the community where the purchaser already owns the home, or because it's a vacant lot doesn't have to own a home, but wants to buy a unit in the cooperative and will contract directly with the corporation for the purchase of that unit, will be using this purchase agreement that's a part of the prospectus materials. And it directs them to read all of the prospectus materials before they complete their closing, and it sets out how their purchase price will be arranged. That will be in the prospectus because the prospectus is used on the sales of the cooperative units. And then we have the master form proprietary lease. This document, together with the articles of incorporation and bylaws, are the documents to be recorded in the Charlotte County records first. And then the individual leases that will be coming back to the park to help sign up will be recorded afterwards. The master form lease is the lease that will apply for the 99-year use rights of each of the cooperative units. The time will be inserted once we've recorded the document. We'll do it at the clerk's office so that we'll know precisely when 99 years from the date of recording will occur. Mark your calendars accordingly. The lease speaks of a generic unit, but for each of you, your unit designation will be your street address, the street number of your home, and that will correspond to a unit number. And just as a point of information, after the lease, we'll be recording the legal description of the property, which is actually a series of 5 parcels that were purchased and brought together as this park over a period of years. And then we also have the copy of the survey that will be recorded behind that. We also have a list of the membership certificate numbers, which are the street numbers in the community, to show that even though they're not in sequence, there's a total of 113 only in the cooperative. And then finally, there's the plot plan that I spoke of, which is the map of the community. Those will all be recorded in the public records to give guidance to the ownership interest of a particular unit. The proprietary lease covers much of the material that I've already spoken about in the bylaws. It does provide for the additional payment of what we call rent in the prospectus, which really represents the mortgage balance, the monthly mortgage payments that those unit owners will pay who have not fully paid the unit initially. There's, of course, the right to make use of the common areas, the exclusive use of your individual lot. There's reference to the bylaws, to the rules and regulations. There'll be the age restriction appearing in this document as well, so we'll make that change again. There's a right of first refusal in the corporation. I mentioned that process of getting the approval of the corporation to the sale of a unit. The corporation will always have the option of reacquiring a unit in the community if it would prefer to do that instead of selling to perhaps an individual who the corporation is not comfortable with, but for no good reason is the corporation authorized to defeat the sale. In that case, the corporation can exercise its right of first refusal to buy the unit instead, step into the place of that purchaser. It will happen on very rare occasion. I don't think it's happened yet in the cooperatives that we represent, but the right is there. It's permitted by law. The corporation must exercise the right within 30 days from getting notice of the pending sale. So it's not going to be used to hold up a sale for any lengthy period of time. But it is important because it gives the board some additional discretion in reviewing those candidates for purchase. There's also an opportunity for the corporation to buy back homes in the community. Now, it's not likely that it will happen, but I'll give you an illustration of another property, a Jet Mobile Home Park up in Palmetto. The park has pretty compact spaces, but they also own some additional vacant land. And so there's some thought to relocating homes into the vacant area to expand the individual home spaces within the confines of the park generally. And in that case, the corporation is in a position on occasion to buy up a unit so that the home can be relocated instead of allowing for that resale to take place. So when I speak about buying additional lands, that's sort of the thought I have in mind, that perhaps in future years it may be possible to recreate the park by relocating homes elsewhere and still maintaining 113 units, or perhaps by a vote of the unit owners to even expand the number of units that would participate in the cooperative by allowing for sales of additional units. It's not in the works now, but as I said, the flexibility is there. We're dealing with a 99-year time frame. Who knows what the future might hold in store. I also shared this with you early on. Even though we create a 99-year lease, you're not necessarily committed to owning the property for 99 years. 10, 20 years from now, this property may have such great development opportunity and the price may be so attractive that the unit owners would determine to sell it and move elsewhere. And that opportunity is permitted in the documents. Now, it's going to require a high vote of the unit owners in order to accomplish it, but with that successful vote, the cooperative may be terminated before the end of the 99 years. And at the termination, at the sale of the property, the unit owners would turn in their membership certificates, and your certificate would be redeemed, and you would each receive an equal share of the sale price of the property. The homes themselves, which are individually owned by you, can be sold separately, or they may be made a part of the deal by separate arrangements for the sales of those homes. So that's a feature that's unique to you, but the land itself, which is owned in common, will be divided equally among the unit owners. Again, there's no pressure to do this. At the end of the 99 years, if the cooperative is still in existence, the unit owners at that time can vote to renew the leases and create a new 99-year lease for the cooperative use of the property. That one I know you have calendared already, so I'm not going to bother you. There's also provision about mechanics liens. There is some concern. We want you to be aware that the corporation will not stand for mechanics liens being filed against individual units in the community. And so there will be pressure financially on a unit owner to take care of a lien against the property. If the lien continues and the corporation learns of it, the corporation is entitled to give 30 days notice to that homeowner to cure the lien, that is to pay it off or to create a bond, some alternative security so that the property itself will be released. And if the unit owner doesn't do that, then the corporation has the option of making the payment for that unit owner to clear the lien against the property, in which case the corporation is then entitled to visa rate interest, 18% interest, for the advancement on behalf of that unit owner, for which the association maintains its lien as though it was an unpaid assessment to the community. And the corporation can eventually force the sale of that home for the non-payment of that obligation. All right, so I want you to be careful. Be sure to pay your debts, pay your individual responsibilities. So there will be some monitoring of the records. When we're engaged in the resale of units in the park, we will pick up liens that have been filed against the individual units. And so we will learn of these recordings in the public records. Again, this has not been a problem in other communities, but I do want you to be aware that there's provision for the payment of those liens. In terms of amending the provisions of the proprietary lease, this will also require a 2/3 vote of the unit owners. So it's nothing that can be done unilaterally by the board of directors. Okay, and that pretty well covers the lease. There's also a document that may or may not be used in the actual filing, which is a consent to the proprietary lease, which is intended for Jack's signature. Since Jack holds the mortgage on the property, there is a reservation of rights in the mortgage that Jack have the ability to review the cooperative documents and be sure that he's comfortable that his mortgage interest in the property is superior to the creation of this cooperative. Of course, by law, it is without his consent because his mortgage is already a record against the title to the property. And leases themselves will come afterwards. So his mortgage does have a superior claim in the property unless he's agreed to relinquish it, which of course he hasn't, nor would any bank as a lender. If Jack consents to the signing of this document, we'll make that part of the recording. By law, he's not obligated to sign, and so he may choose not to. It really would not interfere with the filing itself. Then, as a part of the package, we also have the forms that will be used for the signing of your individual leases. The document initially is called a Memorandum of Proprietary Lease, and it will set the date that you signed, which will become the initial date of your lease, but all of the leases will expire 99 years from the date of the initial recording of the master lease. It shows that you will also be the owner of a membership certificate in the cooperative, and that your interest is 1/113th of the entire property. And of course, here's where we'll get very specific about who are the owners of the unit and in what manner are you holding title. We'll also show your home address that you would prefer to use. You may recall from the lease information forms whether you're going to use your local address or a northern address for tax billing purposes, and those will appear here. And when we come down to the part, we may have to do this over 2 days in case we make errors. We study them together and you feel there are changes that need to be made, then we'll go back, reprint the document, come back with a revised one for your signature. Now, in many cases, I know we'll have to mail papers to family members, and so we may enlist your support there. We'll have a form letter that will explain how the documents need to be executed, but that we want the prompt return of the documents. In Charlotte County, they've been very cooperative in past years with us. If it's not possible to get the document fully signed and returned and recorded before the 1st of January, if we notify the tax authorities that it's all pending and that the unit was indeed purchased before the end of the year, they will typically grant an exception for the homestead exemption and allow the homestead claim against the property for the local owner. We'll deal with that separately when we sign together. There's also a form in here for the assignment of proprietary lease. That will occur on a resale of a unit. The memorandum is only signed once from the corporation to the initial purchaser. On future sales, the initial purchaser will show as the assignor, the transferor of the lease, and then the buyer will appear as an assignee, the receiver of the lease. And those names will appear on the future assignments, also referencing the unit number, and then the cooperative approval of sale will be recorded behind that. There's also a receipt form in the cooperative documents. We'll have each unit owner sign a receipt, which will be made a part of your permanent file here at the office, indicating that you've received a copy of all of the prospectus materials. And the next item is a document that we really don't use, but it appears in the paperwork. It's a document entitled Membership Certificate Power, and it's used by the seller of the certificate to allow for the transfer of the certificate in the corporate records. But we know that the certificate will always be transferred with the lease to the unit, and so we rely on those closing documents to permit the transfer of the certificate. What we ask on a resale of the property is that you turn in your membership certificate so that a new certificate may be prepared in the name of the new owner of the cooperative unit. And I mentioned earlier the description of the recreational and other facilities. This was prepared by your Rules and Bylaws Committee. And then the map of the park, which has been reduced so that we can get it filed and recorded, showing the approximate location of the units, and the list of certificate numbers in the community totaling 113. And then finally, the rules and regulations, which have also been prepared by your committee, and I've merely done a little editing of them. And again, we'll make that change on the age restrictions so that the one person will be 55 in the home, and other people who may be permitted in the home will be at least 45 years of age or older. Many of the rules, I believe, are quite similar to what are already in place in the community in the rental park. I also want you to be aware that there is a 90-day notice provision that I spoke of earlier in the rules that will also apply to renters in the community who have not agreed to buy into the cooperative. Their leases, their rental agreements, their rental prospectuses under Chapter 723 will still apply for their living arrangements here in the community. And one of the requirements of Chapter 723 is that the lot renters get 90 days notice of any proposed change in the rule before it becomes effective. And so what the board proposes to do with the cooperative is also to make rules changes in the cooperative effective on the same 90 days notice. That pretty well covers the documents. So perhaps the board may have some questions of me. If not, then we'll open the floor to allow for any questions from the members, and then perhaps we can have a motion on the voting of the approval of these documents and for the signatures by the President and Secretary where needed.